matin. Good morning, everybody. I just happened to walk into the room past President Macron, and I see we have mac and cheese for lunch today, so very appropriate choice by the chef of parliament. Merci. Oh, come on, Luc, give me that one, man. At least, whether it was a good joke or not, we started the morning with a laugh, and that's what's important. Bienvenue tout le monde. As you know, we have a couple of witnesses with us here this morning. Le directeur général des élections, Stéphane Perron. Bienvenue.
Stéphane Perron from Chief Electoral Office's office. Thank you. Welcome. Welcome to our committee.
With us this morning. Welcome. Nice to see you. We sit together on Indigenous Northern Affairs, but nice to see you in this context. And Ms. O'Connell, welcome to PROC as well this morning. So, colleagues, this will be the usual format that we follow. 6 minutes in the first round, followed by 5 minutes with those couple 2.5 slots. Mr. Chief Electoral Officer, between you and Madame Morin, there'll be 10 minutes for opening remarks. You don't need to use those 10 minutes, but they're yours should you feel you need them. So with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to you. Sorry, just before we begin, I forgot to mention last meeting, colleagues and for witnesses who may not be in front of committee often, just a reminder that with the headsets, in order to avoid damaging audio feedback and other challenges that can pose a health issue for our interpreters who work very hard on our behalf, please just make sure when they're not in use that they are placed on the sticker in front of you. And just do try to keep your phones away from the microphone when you are speaking. Of course, if it's in your ear, witnesses, that's fine. Okay, so with that, Monsieur Perrault, I will give you the floor.
Alors, merci, Monsieur le Président, de me donner l'occasion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for this opportunity to discuss the pilot project, including the Inuktitut language on our electoral ballots. Ms. Karen Morin is with me today. This is going to cause quite a few changes in the Electoral Act in Canada, 18.1 for the Act, for example, which allow the Chief Electoral Officer to install a new process with, of course, the prior agreement of the office with the committee. So we're here to seek your consent. There are certain special features in Nunavut. One of them is language, and it's one electoral district, one riding. The majority of the population, over 80%, speak Inuktitut as their primary language. If this is approved by the committee, we will improve the process so that the electoral process is more accessible and easier to use to all the citizens who speak Inuktitut. We hope that eventually, it's temporary for now, but that they become permanent. We would like also the electoral office to offer more products in the Inuktitut language. We tried this in the last round of elections, and we have a version with a poster which was offered in Inuktitut in these ridings, along with other communication instruments. When I appeared in March 22 before this committee, you were studying the use of Indigenous languages on the ballots. I provided a few options, and I explained that some of the challenges that each of these options would propose. The committee recommended that we undertake a pilot project and for the ballots in the Inuktitut areas. My office began developing a proposal for this project, including discussions which were conducted with various participants and organizations of an Inuktitut nature. All the people consulted were quite in agreement with this.
This is a pilot initiative that is unique to the electoral district of Nunavut. It is a new and exploratory initiative that forms part of Elections Canada's efforts to pursue gradual approaches in order to better reflect the linguistic reality of electors in Nunavut. In brief, the pilot would allow candidates and political parties running in Nunavut to submit their names in Inuktitut, whether in Inuktitut using syllabic symbols or Inuinnaqtun using the Latin alphabet, as well as in English and French, and have those names appear on the regular ballot. It would also allow electors in Nunavut to write the name of a candidate in Inuktitut on a special ballot when voting by mail or at the local Elections Canada office when using write-in ballots. Candidates and political parties would be invited to provide their names in Inuktitut. Elections Canada would not translate or transliterate candidate or party names, nor would we require identification documents to verify names of candidates in Inuktitut. This is the same approach currently used by Elections Nunavut. As we plan for the implementation of this pilot, there are a number of challenges and limitations that we are aware of. One of those challenges is ensuring quality control of the regular ballot in Inuktitut within the very short time frame between the close of nominations and the printing and shipping of the ballots so that they arrive in time for advance voting in the different communities in Nunavut. We have retained the services of readers of Inuktitut to assist us with this task. Another challenge arises from the fact that we are not planning any IT system changes as part of the pilot. This means that while Inuktitut names will be reflected on the ballots, it will not be possible to fully incorporate Inuktitut into all electoral information products, such as elections results on our website on election night. To ensure the integrity of the counting process for special or write-in ballots, the pilot will also rely on hiring readers of Inuktitut at the local Elections Canada office in Iqaluit and at the counting facility here in Ottawa. Election workers who read Inuktitut would assist in recording the intentions of voters who used Inuktitut when filling out special ballots. It's important to be aware of the fact that the Inuktitut is not a fixed language, and the different symbols can be used to express a similar sound. So the name may vary. So we need people who read the language to be able to make sure that they are not unduly rejected if they're written in a different manner. Political parties would also be invited to send observers who can read Inuktitut to maintain the integrity of the counting process during the pilot. With respect to next steps, I have also written to the Senate committee and hope to meet with them later this fall. If we receive approval for the pilot project from both committees, we will invite political parties to submit their proposed party names in Inuktitut as part of our first implementation phase. I plan to write to both committees after the pilot to report on operational and legislative issues that would need to be considered should Parliament wish to make this a permanent service offering, as I think is certainly the objective. Alors, avant de conclure, je souligne.
Before concluding, I've provided some charts, quite a few pages, showing the ramifications of all these temporary mechanisms in the process. Mr. Chair, thank you very much for your invitation and the interest that this committee has on this project, and I'd be pleased to answer your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the very clear and instructive materials that you've provided. Looking forward to the conversation today. With that, we will turn to our first line of questioning, which goes to the Conservatives. Mr. Cooper, the floor is yours for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and let me say at the outset that this is a worthwhile pilot project, and I want to congratulate you, Mr. Perreault, for putting it forward. You stated that under the pilot project, it would allow candidates and political parties to submit their name in Inuktitut, whether using syllabic symbols or using the Latin alphabet, as well as in English and French. So just from the standpoint of what a ballot would look like hypothetically, there could be 4 different versions of a candidate's name and political affiliation. Is that correct?
More likely 3 versions of the candidates' names, usually French and English, are identical, and possibly 2 variations of the party names.
Okay. When you appeared at this committee in March of 2022, you stated, quote, The use of printed ballots with more than 2 languages raises important questions regarding accessibility and design. Putting the names of parties and candidates in multiple languages on a ballot risks making a crowded, busy text that may be difficult for some voters to comprehend, especially voters with low literacy levels or an intellectual disability, as well as voters with visual impairment. Do you still share those concerns? And if so, what measures is Elections Canada planning to undertake pursuant to the pilot project to mitigate these concerns?
So thank you for the question. I will put my comments in context. At the time we were looking at the possibility, or the committee was discussing the possibility of a broader use of Indigenous languages on the ballots, including in electoral districts where there could be up to, with the 1% threshold, up to 5 Indigenous languages in addition to French and English. And that was a very serious concern in my regard. I am much less concerned with that here because we are talking really about 2 or possibly 3 languages. So I don't see that as a major issue. I think it's something that we will have to measure and appreciate as part of this pilot project.
Okay, thank you for that. In the briefing material prepared by Elections Canada with respect to the pilot project last updated on July 29th of this year, it was noted that, quote, special ballots are being considered, but further analysis is required at this time to ensure the integrity of the process is maintained and the operational requirements are met, closed quote. You mentioned that special ballots will be included in the pilot project. I think we have a sample of a special ballot. Has that analysis been completed?
So we have made the decision that we need to absolutely have readers of the language in order to be sure that the ballots are not unduly rejected. So based on consultations that we've made, that we've had in discussions, it's very clear that we should have people who speak the language in order to ensure that they are not unduly rejected.
Could elaborate a little bit on what specific concerns there were with respect to the integrity of the process as it concerns special ballots.
The concern that we had in mind was the fact, as I indicated, the written form of Inuktitut is not fixed, and so a person's name can be expressed using different symbols to indicate the same intent. Someone who is not familiar with the language may not be able to properly understand the voter's intention. So we do need people who are capable of reading fluently the language to make sure that ballots are not unduly rejected.
Now, are there any other issues of quality control that you see? Certainly, you cited one example of that, but are there other concerns?
At the outset, theoretically, when somebody submits a name, we need to make sure that that name is not fanciful or is not vote for me. Myself, not being a reader of the language, I could not make that determination. So that's why I indicated we have retained the services of people who speak the language to make sure that there is no abuse or error that is significant in the construct of the ballot itself. Now that is not something, and we've had discussions with our colleagues at Elections Nunavut, that is not something that they have experienced, but we do need to make sure, because we do not have that linguistic capability.
And just on that point, when you referenced Elections Nunavut, the process that is being proposed in the pilot with respect to candidates making a submission as to how their name would appear on the ballot, that is the same process that has been practiced by Elections Nunavut. Is that correct? And secondly, how long has that practice been in place in Nunavut?
So it is the process that they have in place. I cannot answer your second question since how long. I've not had it's been certainly for several electoral cycles, and they have not encountered any issues with that. But they do not translate or transliterate the names. Typically, I understand that candidates do submit both in the Latin alphabet and the Inuktitut. One of the differences that they have is because there are linguistic variations. They have 25 communities with linguistic variations, but they have one writing for each of those communities, right? So the candidates for those communities use the language as it is used in those communities, and that does not present a challenge. At the federal level, with a single candidate for the district, they will use one variation of that language, and that will be it. There's not going to be 25 variations of that writing.
Thanks very much, Mr. Cooper. 6 minutes over to Ms. Romanato.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Monsieur Perrault, it's a pleasure to see you again, and we're happy to have you back to present to us this study. I remember working with this PROC committee on this study, so I'm happy to have you back here today to give us an update. I have 3 questions. The first question is, you mentioned that you're going to be also presenting to the Senate committee. My question to you is, because we are in a minority parliament and an election can happen at any time, are you prepared to be able to launch this pilot project for the next election, should it be called before October 20th, 2025?
So I can only launch the project with the approval of both committees. That cannot happen because there are deviations from the Act which are recorded in the document that I've shared. So there's a need for that. And then once we have that, so we've translated all of the material. You have copies with you. There are other materials as well, but we have not produced them. We have to print them. We have to put them in packages so that they can be ready to be delivered. And we do need to engage with parties to make sure that they provide their names, should they wish to do that. And then, of course, train the workers. So it would not be an instant implementation, but the sooner I can get the approval, then the sooner I can get working on making
Perfect.
that happen.
And you mentioned that it wouldn't be possible to fully incorporate Inuktitut in all electoral information products, and you mentioned the website. So if a candidate wants to learn more about how to put forward their candidacy to run in the next federal election, will that information be provided on the web to potential candidates?
I'd have to validate that, but certainly the local returning officer would be there to assist all of the candidates who want to put their nominations. This is a process that, as I said, is very similar to the one used, apart from the party names, the one used in territorial elections, so the candidates would not be unfamiliar with that process. We're following the same approach.
Okay, and so this may sound like a bizarre question, but with respect to the size of the ballot, we've just gone through 2 by-elections where we had the longest ballot. And I believe the last election was, I think, 91 candidates on the ballot. You mentioned the difficulty between the time that someone submits their nomination package and becomes an official candidate to the time that you have to print the ballots or the special ballots in terms. Should this happen again, that the next election, when we have the election in Nunavut, we have a similar situation with 91 candidates submitting their names. What challenges does that pose for you? I just can't even imagine the size of the ballot, let alone your ability to quickly have that documentation printed.
Correct, and validate the names. So obviously, we haven't seen that in Nunavut. There are typically fewer candidates there, and we are not planning for a 91 ballot candidate in multiple Indigenous in languages. If that were to happen, this could possibly be a roadblock to the implementation of this project. And I'm optimistic that this would not happen in Nunavut.
And in terms of the request that you've provided us with the changes, the temporary variations for the Canada Elections Act, once you've met with PROC and you've met with the Senate committee, you mentioned that it wouldn't be an instant, but is there additional requirements for you to come back to committee before you can proceed with, or would this be something that you would just be able to go along and continue the process and hopefully be ready for the next election?
The only circumstance where I would need to come back were if the Senate were to require something different as a condition, and then I'd have to, and it would vary from your approval, I would then have to come back to this committee.
Okay. And I know my colleague, MP Fortier, has a question, so I'll cede my time to her.
Merci, merci, ma chère collègue. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, colleague, and thank you very much for your initiative here. I didn't participate in the previous conversations on parts of the study, but in Ottawa-Vanier, we have quite a big population of Inuit, and they still have an Iqaluit address, for example. So would we be ready in other writings to respond to people who would like to exercise their right to vote within this pilot project? Well, we are aware of the fact that some people who usually reside in Nunavut have the right to vote. They would be able to receive their special ballot online and receive a kit that would allow them to vote in the language of their choice. That's quite interesting. I'd like to participate in this pilot project to next, ensuring that the polling stations in Ottawa would be able to participate here in Ottawa with the special ballot and to accommodate people who need the special ballot. Well, if they are out of their area, they have to do it online to obtain the ballot. But you'll have an 800 line or some such thing, I suppose? Yes. Well, we have to get that information out there. Yes, of course. Thank you, Madame Remano.
Director, I will note that until the recent by-elections, my by-election of last year held the record with 48 names on the longest ballot, and they've since doubled that. So no longer a record holder, I suppose, in that regard. Madame Gaudreau, il y a 6 minutes à vous.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. It's always a great pleasure to have you before us, and it's very important to learn, and I'm learning constantly. I do have a few questions, but I have to admit that my colleagues have stolen my thunder, and they've asked my questions. And I want to make sure that I understood correctly what we have to take a demand. You have indicated clearly that we have to make a decision here. And my concern is making sure that you have everything you need to go ahead with this and to implement your pilot. An election may occur at any time. What challenge, perhaps risk, has not yet been exposed? Is there anything else we can do to assist you if, let's say, we triggered an election tomorrow morning, for example? Well, we follow the news quite closely, and we tried to make sure we consulted with all stakeholders in the Nunavut area. Of course, an unforeseen situation might arise at any time. This is why this is a pilot project. We are going to evaluate the pilot project after the fact within the communities, focus groups, for example, who will give us their feedback. There's no candidate in each and every riding up there yet, so we will learn from this experience and experiment, in fact, and we will adjust as needed. Once we make our offer of service, it's very difficult to withdraw it. It's not permanent, of course. If we want to make this permanent, we will have to bring amendments to the law. But I think that we should try to do this very, very quickly after the next election so that we don't get caught up in the next election. Yes, okay, I think that's quite clear. I have quite a few minutes, but I don't want to take it if I don't really need it. How do you proceed in such a vast geographic district, given all the differences from community to community? Well, I don't think most Canadians can really grasp the reality of the situation. It's huge. We're talking 2 million square miles. And, well, it's about the size of Western Europe. 25 communities. Elections, Nunavut have 25 or 23 active electoral directors in the community at their order of government. We have one. So it's a very sizable challenge, particularly if we have to print these special ballots in time. They're not printed in Nunavut right now. We'd have to, of course, put out a special request to get them done as quickly as possible on site. And we have to, of course, ensure as soon as the candidacy nomination process is terminated that everything is in order to start strategizing as to the delivery and the logistics. I'm done, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Really nice to have you here because you can certainly offer a unique perspective to this. So the floor is yours for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Stefan and Corinne. It's nice to see you both again. I'm glad I had caught one of your focus groups in Iqaluit, so it's nice to see some of the results of what you've been trying to do to help make sure that Inuktitut speaking and reading people can be more engaged in the federal election process. I do appreciate all the efforts that you've made. I just wanted to ask some questions to help maybe give some context to what I know my experience has been so that more parliamentarians can understand just some of the challenges that you're talking about. Just as an example, and opportunities even, because Nunavut, having been a territory since 1999, that have been holding elections for some years now. I understand as well, having been from the NWT before Nunavut became a territory, that there were being in the NWT electoral system as well, that providing ballots in more than 4 languages is also a possibility with the NWT. I wonder if you could explain to the committee if you've consulted with what they do in the NWT, who's got 11 official languages.
Yes, we have, and my colleague here has been in regular contact with our friends in the Elections Northwest Territories. One of the things that we have been doing with them and with their assistance is translating more of the products in the various languages. There are, as you say, 11 official languages there that will be found on site at the polling locations in order to make the polling experience, the voting experience, more inclusive and more reflective of their linguistic reality. So we have a very good working relationships with our colleagues there.
Thank you for that. You had mentioned during your speech that it will not be possible to fully incorporate Inuktitut into all electoral information products such as election results. I wonder if you could describe for us what the challenges are to make sure that Inuktitut and Inuinnaqtut could appear in other electoral information products.
The choice that we've made is because of timing. We don't know when the election will take place, and we did not want to invest in changing all of our IT systems to make those changes until we have a satisfactory experience and we can have the agreement of Parliament to make this a permanent service offering. So it's a compromise, but from a voter experience point of view, they will see their the ballot and the products at the polling station in their language.
Okay. I'm wondering if there are barriers in the current legislation, because as you mentioned, printing of the ballots happens outside of Nunavut. Are there barriers in the legislation that prevents the ballots from being printed in Nunavut communities?
So the ballot, as it is designed in the Elections Act, requires a stub to be turned and a counterfoil. And there are a limited number of printers who actually can offer that type of printing. So it's not unique, in fact, to Nunavut. We have a limited number of printers that serve all of Canada.
Given that you seem to understand that Nunavut is so vast, as you've mentioned, it's 2 million square miles. There's 3 time zones in Nunavut. All 25 communities are fly-in communities. And would you agree that maybe ensuring that printing can happen in Nunavut could help to make that barrier less, so that printers can help to make sure that printing happens in Nunavut?
So I would answer in 2 ways. As a stopgap measure, we always typically allow the possibility, I have the power under the Act to make certain adaptations, to print locally without the stub and the counterfoil copies of the ballot, irrespective of what we're talking about here today in terms of the languages, simply because of the risk that in some flying communities, because of weather or other circumstances, that we cannot get the ballot in time. So there's always a stopgap measure, and in that case, with adaptation of the legislation, you can proceed with the vote with essentially copied ballots, which are hand numbered. We haven't had to use it, but it's always very, very close. The alternative for more fulsome solution is to remove the counterfoil requirement. This is something that's unique at the federal level, to my knowledge. Provinces and territories do not have that element on their ballot format, and that's, I think, something that brings on the table a broader series of considerations.
I'm sorry, is that legislated in
It is
Elections Act?
legislated, yes.
Okay, so that could be another amendment to help
It
make
could be
sure
another
that
amendment.
Indigenous languages could be.
There would be other benefits to removing the stub and counterfoil. And again, this is a security control, but it is not one that is commonly used. In fact, as I said, at the provincial level, it is not used.
I don't.
One more question, Lori.
Okay,
Yeah.
because Nunavut is only one riding with 25 different locations, have you seen what the barriers of what Nunavut has having been one riding? Because I do remember, especially medical patients that are not in their home communities that tried to go to vote in Iqaluit. What opportunities would you recommend to make sure that in that one riding, for example, that people can still vote even if they're not in their home community?
So right now, they can vote by special ballot, but until day 6, and that's a limitation. So in order to remove that limitation, we have to introduce electronic lists of electors, which is a project that we have for the next election, but not necessarily in Nunavut. It will not be wide scale for the next election, but down the road, because it is a single riding, it would be possible with electronic lists to have a strikeout and make sure that there's no double voting, and therefore allow more opportunities of that nature.
Thanks very much, Ms. Edlout. Okay, colleagues, we are going to head into the second round of questioning, which is a reduction of time a little bit. So, Mr. Cooper, floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Perot, the date of the next territorial election in Nunavut is October 27, 2025. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you for that. And I find that very interesting because October 27th, 2025 happens to be the same day that the Liberal government's Bill C-65 proposes to push the date of the next federal election back to. The fact that Bill C-65 would set the date of the next federal election on the very same day as the Nunavut territorial election demonstrates that the story that the Liberals have told Canadians about the need to move back the date of the fixed election date by 1 week, namely to avoid a conflict with a holiday and the Alberta municipal election, is completely disingenuous. It is about as dishonest as it gets. They have moved it back for one reason and one reason only, and that is so that soon-to-be-defeated Liberal MPs who would not qualify for their pension if the election was held on the current fixed election date will suddenly qualify for their pension. It is a pension bill disguised as an elections bill, And if the Liberals were honest, they would name the bill what it is, and that is the Loser Liberal Pension Protection Act. And with that, I will cede the balance of my time to Mr. Calkins.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you for being here. I've got just a couple of questions. First of all, can you just elaborate a little bit more on the importance that the stub and the counterfoil play in ballot security and control? Can you just, how important is that?
Stub and counterfoil takes us back probably to 19th century concerns around what is commonly referred as daisy chain fraud, whereby a voter walks in, obtains a ballot, does not return it to the poll worker, walks out with a blank ballot, and then hands it over to a candidate or party operative, and in exchange, they start a chain whereby they can exchange ballots to future upcoming electors, and these would be pre-marked ballots. So that with that chain, the fraud could occur whereby the marking of the ballot actually takes place outside of the poll in successive waves to influence the vote. Now, this is not something that's been seen in modern times. I don't know, in fact, that it has been seen in Canada. I think risks of fraud in this day and age are more of a digital nature than they are of this nature, and that's why I don't believe, I may be mistaken, but I don't believe that the counterfoil and stub procedure continues to exist at the provincial and territorial levels.
Okay. But still, the fraud prevention, I think, and integrity of the election is paramount. So, I mean, this does sound like something that could potentially happen, so I don't know why we would expose ourselves to that if we ever decided to move away from that. But I've got some other questions. I'm not a linguist. That's my daughter. She's good at this kind of stuff, so I'm going to be asking some questions. I don't know who's best to answer them. But when you were describing it, and just for some clarity, it sounds to me like Inuktitut is more of a phonetic, using the syllables language than it is a grammatic issue. And I'm just wondering if you have several candidates with similar names. These things happen, when you got 338, now 300 and whatever it is, 43 ridings that are going to be in play in the next election. Is there enough? Are you confident that you'll have enough people who are fluent in the various? I'm going to call them dialects for lack of a better word, but. What do you do then? I mean, at that point in time, if the variance between the names is so little, even in the English and French side of the equation, then one could only assume that they would be very similar, and with the variations of the various regions that the languages are used in Nunavut, what is this going to be a problem?
So it will not. This proposal, this pilot would not add to this problem because the candidate's name would also continue to be required in the current language, which is the French or English language, as the case may be.
So the purpose of this exercise is because people don't speak English or French. So if that's what we're trying to do is engage more people who might not be able to engage in one of the official languages of English and French, and we don't have consistency in the Inuktitut language, I'm just wondering if it is potentially problematic. Would the political parties' names be changed, or is the ballot going to be consistent, I guess, across all of the territory in an election?
So the ballot will be consistent. The party names will be the names decided by the party. So I will not, as indicated, Elections Canada is not going to translate or transliterate. Some parties' name currently, Bloc Québécois is one example, does not exist in English. There are English party names that do not exist in French. So parties don't have to have a translated name, even in French and English as we speak. Similarities in names is something that currently exists, and there are mechanisms to add a marker at a middle name to make that difference in the current framework without the additional concern of Inuktitut. So I do not believe that it adds to the confusion. In fact, it may reduce it because of the additional language. That said, two things to keep in mind. The vast majority in Nunavut do speak English or French. And we always try to have poll workers that speak Inuktitut. We don't always succeed, but we certainly try to do that. And so they can help the voters understand the ballot if there are questions.
Thanks very much,
Chair.
Mr. Calkins. Mr. Turnbull, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thanks very much, Chair. And thanks to Mr. Perrault and Ms. Morin for being here today. It's great to see you. Really happy to hear about the work that we did on PROC. And I'm looking at Lori Idlet for her advocacy in this area and the incredible contributions that you made. Lori, it was really great to see you back here. I'm glad to be back on PROC, and I'm glad to see this pilot moving forward. I think it's a real step in the right direction. I think we can all agree. So thank you for your commitment and your work on this. I do have a few questions, but just wanted to show my sort of solidarity for your hard work to make this happen. You know, in your opening remarks, I read them as well, so I think there might be some differences, perhaps, but in what you said and what you wrote ahead of time. But I note in at some point towards the end of your remarks, you had said that you envision coming back to the committee or coming back to Parliament with operational and legislative issues that might need to be remedied in order to make this pilot a permanent service offering, I think was the way you said it, which is great. What do you anticipate that those might be? So do you already have, it sounds like you already have an idea that there's going to be some challenges that need to be overcome or some legislative changes that may be necessary in order to do this more permanently. What do you anticipate some of those to be?
We simply are cognizant of the fact that it is not as simple as it may appear at first glance, and so we've tried to do consultations and work with territorial partners who've done this and consult locally. We think we have everything covered. You will notice that in the document that I shared, in the legal changes, the legal variations, there is a final clause that would allow me to make any additional change that is necessary for the implementation. So if something would arise, it's not a policy direction change, but there's a technical issue. But this is why it's a pilot. So when we come back, we will take stock of what took place and how well it went, and I'm confident that it will go well. But the nature of the pilot is to draw lessons and habilitate Parliament to make a permanent decision as to go forward or not with this, or in a different way or not.
Thank you for that. Are there other precedents in areas where you have the power to make necessary slight changes to your operations and, you know, where necessary? And then do you justify those in writing, or how does that work?
There are two powers in the Act. One is for the implementation of the special ballots in its various forms. So there are adaptations that I can make that are similar in formulation to this, that where it's necessary for the carrying out of the provisions. And there are regularly some adaptations that are made for that. And they're always published on our website, and they're shared with the parties and candidates as we go. And then there's a provision in Section 17 of the Act that is more for unusual and unforeseen circumstances. You can think about electors are displaced by a flood or a fire, and we have to allow them to vote out of writing. And so this is a fairly common occurrence. It's expected to be more common in such a big country. So there is a power there. And again, these adaptations are made publicly, transparently. They're published on the website and shared with parties and candidates.
So I led you to that because I had a feeling that you were going to say that. So it's not unheard of that you have some flexibility within your operations and that you justify those documented, that people are aware. There's a level of transparency there that we all agree is paramount to upholding our institution here, which is very important. So thank you for that. I think that sort of perhaps sets the stage for you coming back later at some point in the next Parliament to report back on how things went, which leads me to my next question. So you've talked about perhaps this could be a permanent service offering. I think in our work and deliberations as a committee before, there was quite a lot of support for this pilot. But I think the underlying objective is perhaps to remove barriers and increase voter engagement. So my question is, how are you going to measure the success of this pilot? You've mentioned doing focus groups and getting feedback, which I think means you're open to continuous improvement, which is fantastic. But how will you determine whether this is successful or not?
Essentially, there are two aspects. One is from an operational point of view, are there things that hurdles that we had to confront, and what were those hurdles, so that there's a technical aspect to success in this way. And the other one is the voter experience, and that's where it's important to go into communities and speak to the users, and not simply do a survey that may or may not have much uptake.
Yeah, sorry, Mr. Turnbull, I was trying to listen to two at once. That is all the time that we have for your line of questioning. Thank you, though. Madame Gaudreau, il y a 2 minutes et 10 minutes, 2 minutes 30 secondes.
2.5 minutes, Madame Gaudreau. Well, I appreciated your questions on these measures and the importance of this pilot project. I really like pilot projects because, in fact, it's a trial run, and you will take a look after you've conducted your pilot. Then you have questions. In fact, we use photos, faces, if you will, in Quebec. So could it be applicable in other areas of Canada? Well, that's a great question. Yes, we have given it some thought, but in the current state of the law, we don't use facial recognition or photos. Pilot project would be quite correct in this, but for posters, perhaps. We could have posters in the polling stations and see how it works. Get a picture of each candidate as quickly as possible and as a recent photo. Some candidates might object to that, but it won't be for the next election. But I was thinking perhaps we could conduct, but more as posters rather than on the ballot itself. But then we could see if we could go any further with it. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. You've turned in 3 minutes of your time to the committee this day.
Thank you so much, Qayyum. I'm going to build on my line of questioning regarding electors who happen not to be home in their communities on election day, because a lot of the times they would have been away for weeks or months at a time, especially if it's medical travel. And Nunavut, being such a huge territory, has 3 urban hubs, or 4 maybe. So in the west we have Yellowknife and Edmonton. For central we have Winnipeg, and then for the eastern part we have Ottawa. And as Mona pointed out, we have increasing population of Inuit as well. And I wonder if Elections Canada has considered maybe doing special one-day polls in these urban centers to make sure that those medical patients, for example, are able to vote on, so that they can make sure that their vote is counted.
So this is a significant challenge for us to do that. I think we're doing an important step forward with this pilot and see what challenges we face and whether we can expand further. At this point in time, people who are voting by special ballot in Nunavut will have the ability to use, so if they're, for example, in a hospital in Nunavut out of their home, they will be served with a special ballot that includes Inuktitut on it. If they are detained in Nunavut, they will be served with that offering. But if they are detained outside of Nunavut, for example, we will not have different kits for different prisons across the country. So those electors would not have access to the special. So there are limitations to what we're doing now. I think that we have to recognize that. All electors from Nunavut can apply by mail, especially those who are outside of the district. And if they're outside of district for a significant amount of time, we would like to communicate as much as information ahead of time so that they can plan their vote and obtain a special ballot in Inuktitut to cast their vote. But that would require an application online. We will not be distributing across the country or even in the 3 hubs that you mentioned directly those kits.
Ms. Edlund, I'm going to turn the floor to Mr. Duguid as your time is out, but I understand there may be some time coming back to you. Mr. Duguid, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and Ms. Idlout already mentioned that Winnipeg is a service center for many Inuit who come south for medical treatment and other services, and I'd like to cede my time to her.
Ms. Idlout, I'll give you the floor.
Koyanamik so much, Terry. I appreciate that very much. So just continuing on the discussion about ensuring that electors can make their vote count given the barriers. I wondered as well if there's been consideration of the role, the important roles that the elections officers have in the communities. And I'm not too sure how many of your staff will be bilingual in Inuktitut. And I think a lot of the times, unfortunately, we might find that the staff that you end up hiring are only bilingual in English and French, whereas candidates might have scrutineers that are bilingual in English and Inuktitut. And I wondered what kind of resolution might happen if the bilingual Inuktitut scrutineer has a difference of opinion with what's going on when the votes are being counted between the different candidates.
So the role of, it's a very good question. The role of the scrutineer, as always, is to observe the count and take note of any disagreement that they have. And there are opportunities for either a recount or a contested election before a court. So there are legal remedies for that, but that is not unique to that. It is a challenge to recruit. It's a challenge across the country, but it's even more of a challenge in Nunavut. And so we always seek as much as possible to have people who speak Inuktitut, but we are not always capable of recruiting every poll worker who can speak. So that is the case. We, as much as possible, will have one person at least in each poll to assist anybody who has linguistic challenges.
Okay, thank you. I think I just have a little bit more time. I think just to keep broaching the idea of the opportunity that elections can have with having special polls outside of Nunavut. I just lost my train of thinking. Damn it. I had such a good idea. Having special polls, I think, is such a good opportunity just to really make sure that some of the barriers that are experienced in the different communities with one riding and having different communities having to fly out with the challenges of like with weather. By the way, I am excited to have the same election day as the Nunavut election day because I think that's a great opportunity to make sure that there's an increased voter turnout. I think electors would prefer to vote in the same day rather than 1 week apart. So I do hope that with the approval of this pilot project that we do consider how election, I don't know the terminology that they use, that people would be less likely to go vote if there's one week apart, but really just helping to ensure that, and I'm glad to hear that you would make special provisions so that people in hospitals, at least in Nunavut, hopefully that goes for elders who might not be mobile, to also be visited by elections officials to make sure that they can vote as well.
Mr. Chair, if with your permission, I would seize the opportunity to talk about the challenge. I understand the enthusiasm for having a single day of vote in terms of having people drawn at the same day. But the availability of locations, and more importantly, poll workers. We cannot have poll workers administering two sets of rules with different identification requirements at the same time. Recruiting poll workers for a federal election is a huge challenge, and we spoke about the challenges having enough that speak the language. Having to compete for recruitment with any provincial territorial management body would have an extreme impact on the availability of services. So I would caution the committee, and hopefully if it does come to study Bill C-65, I can speak to that. But I do not recommend overlapping provincial and territorial elections with a federal election.
Thank you very much, Mr. Perot. I'm sorry, Ms. Edloot, we do have to keep going here. My apologies to Mr. Duncan. I actually accidentally skipped him going to Mr. Duguid. Nonetheless, you'll still have the same amount of time. So, Mr. Duncan, 5 minutes to you, and then that will conclude this round.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No problem. I have a thick skin, so I've gotten over it quite quickly. Mr. Perot, thank you for being here today. I want to build on exactly that topic of the overlapping election date as proposed in C-65. It would present some massive logistical challenges in terms of polling locations and the human resources side of things for poll workers in a federal election and a territorial election. You've alluded to that. But I also want to get your confidence when we talk about this pilot project and the supports you mentioned in your comments and throughout this morning of Elections Nunavut helping with those language requirements and verifications. Are you confident or less confident that if the election day and the counts are on the same evening and same night, that you're going to be able to have the human resources in Nunavut, and you mentioned in Ottawa as well, to be able to prepare the ballots and to do, for example, under the special voting rules, special ballots, be able to interpret those that need to be deciphered?
Yes, our experience, our consultations with the Elections Nunavut, based on their experience, shows that it is quite possible to do the count using multilingual ballots in Nunavut. May not be the same elsewhere in the country, other Indigenous languages, but it is possible. And there is, as we've discussed, a significant community of people who speak the language here in Ottawa, and we are confident that we are going to be able to recruit people to.
Now, specifically the fact that there's going to be, right now as proposed in C-65, that it would be the election days would be overlapping. It's one thing to partner with a territorial elections, Nunavut in this case, but to have the HR necessary on election night, special ballot counting, would there not be, and I'm just thinking, I just looked up the numbers quickly, there's 22 districts and ridings in the territory for that, dozens of candidates and multiple languages additionally that are used in the territory. Are you, with the overlap, are you going to be able to still have the HR required? You do mention that there is, but when they're running their own election, I'm sure they have the same recruitment challenges for poll workers and for those who speak the language. Is that not going to be an increased challenge in this case?
So we are relying on their experience, but not their resources to conduct this pilot. If there was an overlapping election on the same day on polling day, that would present important challenges, whether or not we do this pilot. Simply the ability to have locations and staff, poll workers to conduct the election would be a very significant challenge.
And just my last question is on the report that you will do back to our committee on this pilot and our support to do so in reviewing all this. I'll just ask, when you go back and look at the poll-by-poll results or how individuals voted, it shows by poll, and then Group 1 or Group 2 of special voting rules. And just looking at the last election in 2021 in Nunavut, there was 614 votes under the special voting rules, only 12 rejected ballots as part of that, but it was about 8.4% of the votes cast. Are you able to go and break down further whenever somebody would complete a special ballot, just for numbers purposes, what percentage of individuals chose to write their special ballot in Inuktitut? And then if there are challenges, you mentioned about the spelling and the symbols could be a bit different. Would you be able in this circumstance to break down that further just to understand the scope, if there is a challenge with that, just the volume or magnitude or lack thereof, if that would be the case?
Yes, I do not expect to do that examination on polling night because the priority there is to get the results out. But certainly once that task is completed, we would examine, unusual rejection rates. We can open the poll bags and look at how many ballots were cast using which language, and so forth. So there is opportunity to take the time to study this carefully.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Duncan. Colleagues, that concludes the discussion that we've had with Monsieur Perreault and Madame Morin. I want to thank you both very much for being here. Just briefly, for the benefit of both committee members and the public that may be watching, in terms of the next steps here, I have asked our analysts to draft a report on this subject. That will come to the committee for consideration. And at that point, we will determine whether or not we want to send that report as is or amended back to the House. And that will be our contribution to this part of the procedure. And then, as has been mentioned, our colleagues over at Senate Legal in that committee will also have to render their own judgment. So in terms of the next steps for this, we will await the report from our analyst. We will have an internal discussion. And Mr. Director, we hope to be able to get back to you in the not too distant future with our findings and our analysis on that. In the meantime, colleagues, that was a great meeting, very interesting discussion. Thank you to Madame Idlout for joining us and providing your contributions here as a guest member. We are going to suspend briefly, colleagues, et puis on va continuer avec une...
And we will continue with the discussion on something completely different. We will see you in a few minutes.
Now, colleagues. Welcome to Mr. Jennis, Madame Matheson, welcome back. Colleagues, we are here to discuss the question of privilege related to cyber attacks targeting members of Parliament. This is a discussion that we had several meetings in relation to in the last session, and we have some meetings dedicated to continuing the discussion towards as we move forward this session. We have a number of witnesses with us today. We do have some technical audio difficulties with the witness that's appearing online, but I would like to just get us moving, and we will hopefully be able to troubleshoot that in the very near future. Appearing today, we have with us Michel Junot-Katsuya, former chief of the Asia Pacific Desk from the Canadian Security Intelligence Services. We have from the Center for International Governance Innovation, Aaron Schull, the Managing Director and General Counsel, as well as Wesley Work, Senior Fellow. From the Interparliamentary Alliance on China, joining us online is Luc Dupulfort, who is the Executive Director. So, colleagues, we are going to get underway. Witnesses, you will have 5 minutes each, although for Mr. Schull and Mr. Wark, I understand you may be splitting your time, but it'll be 5 minutes in total for your testimony in the introductory component here. With that, I'm going to go to Mr. Katsuya to begin. The floor is yours, sir.
Merci. Bonjour. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the members of the committee. I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to share with you my observations and concerns as to the future of our nation.
Question of privilege related to the cyber attack targeting members of Parliament. In short, experts expect a sharp increase in the next years of cyber attacks, basically. Targeting not only members of the Parliament, but many elected officials of all government levels, federal, provincial, and municipal. Cyber attacks have been and will remain the weapon of choice for many threat agents. This implied direct and substantive attack against elected official institutions, our democratic system. Intelligence community identified basically 5 threat agents: state-sponsored attack, radicalized citizens, organized crime, hackers, political activists, and insider threat. State-sponsored threat. In the last 2 years, very dark revelation came to be known publicly about how the current and previous government have neglected, sometimes intentionally avoiding to act against foreign interference threat. Since now the cat is out of the bag, we will be forced foreign agent will be forced for a while to work a little bit more covert. So cyber attack will be chosen. Today, we hope that public and elected official awareness have been raised, but not enough, sadly. When it comes to cybersecurity, Canada is last in the investment compared to all the G7 and Five Eyes. As the work of the committee demonstrates, you are still working on the issue, and many of you must feel like you are pounding your head against a wall. Unfortunately, petty political gains prevent Canadians from receiving the necessary protection. Not enough have been done on the legal side, like bringing modification to the criminal code. Bad course of action has been selected, and I must say, despite the fact that many experts advise to go in different ways. From the public perspective, it only increased the bitterness and the loss of confidence into our institution. Je le répète, il est inévitable.
I will repeat, it's inevitable that the cyber threats against elected people will be substantially increased in the next years. The offensive powers, China, India, Russia, Iran, Israel, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and many others have modified their strategies in this light. And as they will, of course, at a certain time diminish their presence and operate the more sub rosa.
Continuous negative and supportive campaign against against people opposed to them or in favor to them, hacking various systems to gain sensitive information, neutralizing communication and compromising data by targeting specific individuals. The nature of the work of elected officials is to travel, to meet their constituent, and to take sometimes work at home, everything needed to weaken our cybersecurity. Therefore, more discipline, more awareness, more verification, more ongoing education, and more vigilance are needed. You must have noticed that I've used the word elected officials. I stress we need to sort of work with the federal, the provincial, and the municipal level. Current cities like Toronto, Vancouver, Ottawa, even smaller cities like Brossard or Markham, and many others are under the influence of agents of China as we speak, and are at the highest level. This is not fiction. This is fact. You want names? I got names. National security without participation of the province is just wishful thinking. Citoyens radicalisés. Le sergent d'armes de la Chambre des communes.
The Sergeant at Arms, the House of Commons, reported in 2018 an increase of over 800% in threats against elected individuals. The RCMP have faced 65 more requests for protection and do not have the manpower to protect all members of the House. In Quebec, more than 10% of our elected people at the municipal level, 800 individuals, have in fact withdrawn, quit, or walked away from their election because of threats against their families. We had to give them flak jackets and protective equipment.
To develop a little bit further on the points that I presented.
Merci, Monsieur Junot-Catua. Okay, Mr. Shull and Mr. Work, I'm not sure between the two of you who would like to go first, but Mr. Work, it looks like yourself, so your 5 minutes between the two of you will begin now. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Erin and I can be a dog and pony show, but I'm not sure how much value I can give you in 2.5 minutes. I'll do my best, but we are really appearing here as individuals. The story of APT-31 cyber attack, CSE calls it a cyber incident, is a complex one, and I hope it might be of some assistance to the committee to provide my perspective on it. The Canadian public and members of Parliament first became aware of a cyber incident attack from a PRC entity known as APT-31 in March 2024, when the United States Department of Justice unsealed an indictment against 7 APT operatives. The indictment revealed that the efforts of this PRC group spanned some 14 years and targeted U.S. and foreign critics, businesses, and political officials. One of its many targets was the Interparliamentary Alliance on China, IPAC, which experienced an attack in January 2021 that was technical in nature, designed to elicit details about targets, IP addresses, browser types, and operating systems through spear phishing. Caught up in this reconnaissance attack were a number of Canadian parliamentarians. The attack was understood as being unsuccessful. CSE and its Cyber Center were at the forefront of efforts to identify this cyber incident. In fact, CSE was first tipped off by a trusted foreign partner, and to work with the House of Commons administration. Collaboration between CSE and the House of Commons administration is regulated, as I think you know, by an MOU, first signed in 2016. Testimony at PIFI on September 24th indicated that a new version of the MOU has recently been signed, stimulated by lessons learned from the APT-31 case. Documentation provided to PIFI, including a chronology of events, indicated that information sharing between CSE, the Cyber Center, and the House of Commons IT security team about the APT-31 reconnaissance was neither seamless nor sufficient in 2021. CSE's mandate and capabilities need to be understood. It has a sophisticated sensor intrusion warning capacity that it deploys on networks and in the cloud to protect federal institutions and other levels of government. And here I must disagree with my colleague, Mr. Juno Katsuya, in terms of understanding Canada's cybersecurity capabilities. This sensor capacity that CSE has developed has won praise from Canada's Five Eyes partners as kind of best in class. It was first deployed to protect Parliament starting in 2018 and has since been expanded. According to the most recent annual CSE report, the organization blocks on average 6.6 billion intrusions a day. When CSE becomes aware of a cyber operation targeting Parliament, it passes technical information about that attack to the IT security staff of the parliamentary administration for further action. CSE does not engage directly with parliamentarians in terms of providing threat warnings, in contrast to the process set in place for CSIS according to a ministerial directive issued in May 2023. CSE is not a domestic security service. However, it does have an assistance mandate under the CSE Act and can provide supportive intelligence and technical means to CSIS. A directive issued by the Chief of CSE in September 2023 and provided in an institutional report to PIFI emphasizes the significance of its assistance mandate as well as the need to, and I quote from that directive, ensure the timely dissemination of its products to the appropriate consumers of intelligence, including the House of Commons administration. That important principle must...
Ce principe important doit être maintenu et testé dans la pratique. À l'avenir, il sera particulièrement important. Il y a un rappel au règlement.
Okay.
Apologies.
Correct. Okay. I'm going to let you get, I press pause. You're at about a minute, but I'll offer you a couple more seconds to buffer for that, okay? Go ahead.
A couple more seconds. I remember when it used to be 10 minutes, Mr. Chair. Going forward, I believe, and I'll just end on this point, it will be particularly important for parliamentarians to be informed when appropriate and to inform themselves about threats posed by cyber attacks. Parliamentarians cannot be mere passive consumers of warnings. While cyber attacks come in multiple nefarious forms, online information operations deploying disinformation and malinformation may ultimately prove to be the greatest threat to the activities of parliamentarians and the trust Canadians place in Parliament. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Schill, were you going to add commentary here? There are a few seconds remaining.
No, that's fine. We'll pick it up in the questions, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. We are going to try to turn now to Monsieur de Pulfort, and I'll just ask that you begin speaking. We'll know within a couple seconds whether our technical difficulties have been worked through or not, so the floor is yours. Okay, malheureusement, Monsieur...
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
I hope. Okay,
yeah, it sounds like we can hear you, so I'm just looking for a thumbs up from our audio folks. Okay, we're good. So the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members of the committee, and to the staff of your committee for facilitating my participation. As has been described, I'm the Executive Director of the Interparliamentary Alliance on China, or IPAC. Around 23rd of March 2024, I learned that the UK government was preparing to make an announcement regarding a PRC state-sponsored cyber attack against certain UK politicians. I was involved in some of the journalism leading up to it. So on the morning of the 25th of that month, that announcement was given from the dispatch box by then Deputy Prime Minister Oliver Dowden, who did not mention the Interparliamentary Alliance on China, IPAC. Later that day, the United States Department of Justice unsealed an indictment which said the following, and I quote, "The conspirators registered and used 10 conspirator-created accounts on an identified mass email and mail merge system to send more than 1,000 emails to more than 400 unique accounts of individuals associated with IPAC." So according to the US government then, this was clearly an attack that was targeting IPAC. For this and other reasons, on the 4th of April 2024, 42 IPAC members from around the world wrote to Secretary Blinken saying, and I quote again, "We were very concerned to learn that the APT-31 pixel reconnaissance effort had focused principally on the IPAC membership. We were further alarmed that no IPAC legislators appear to have been warned by their own security or intelligence services, close quote. The letter precipitated some correspondence with the US State Department, and during this time, the FBI, through the State Department, kindly offered to take our distribution list, cross-reference it with their list of 400 emails associated with IPAC. They agreed to inform us of emails appearing on both lists. So on the 19th of April, we got back a list of hits, 121 hits to be exact. So on the 22nd of April, I sent a second list to see whether more emails were attacked than we had sent from our list, as 121 is nowhere near the 400 that had been claimed to have been targeted by the FBI. Later, I got 4 more hits on the 3rd of May. So as a result, I was able to confirm via the FBI that members of IPAC from 18 parliaments had been attacked. 120 parliamentarian members, 116 of these using parliamentary emails, 4 using non-parliamentary emails. One of that 4, by the way, was Canadian and I believe is in the committee today. And in total, 18 Canadian politicians, and that number included 5 staff around the world. I sought then to brief every person targeted on what had happened, as I did not consider it ethical to refuse to disclose such information to those targeted. And as a very gentle corrective to Mr. Walk, who's just spoken, Canadian MPs did not learn from the United States Department of Justice that they had been targeted. They learned principally from me and from IPAC. So I have very little time, so a few issues to highlight that may provoke discussion. First, we have high confidence that the attackers had obtained IPAC's distribution list, which included personal email addresses of politicians, including one Canadian. 2, we have confirmed that 2 targeted countries were informed in 2021, before the FBI had contacted governments in 2022. 3, in 2022, the FBI communicated to host governments that this was intended to be part of a progressive attack. 4, 2 IPAC members, a French senator and one other who I can't name as an investigation is ongoing, were successfully compromised in or around March 2021, 2 months subsequent to being attacked by APT-31. 5, there will be many more email addresses targeted than those I've confirmed. All I've got is the correspondence between my list and the FBI's list. 6, the response of various parliamentary security services was highly variable around the world. So for the committee's consideration, my arguments would be as follows, and I'm very happy to discuss these. First, we believe that failing to inform parliamentarians meant that they could not protect themselves or the sensitive information to which they had access from a progressive cyber attack, including high-risk transnational repression cases which many of our parliamentarians handle. Second, telling parliamentarians that this attack was not successful or not serious is questionable at best and misleading at worst. There is a marked disparity between briefings given on this by the FBI and other government agencies, especially regarding the severity of these attacks. Regarding other recommendations, hopefully I'll have time to cover those in questions, and I thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, sir, for your opening remarks. With that, colleagues, we are going to head into the first round of questioning. And Mr. Genis, the floor will be yours for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. My questions will be for Mr. Pulford. I'm going to try to cover a lot of ground. I know you could probably talk for 6 minutes on each of these, but just maybe in 45 seconds or less. Why does IPAC matter? Why is IPAC important? Why is it a target for the PRC?
The PRC doesn't like dissent abroad. It doesn't like people challenging its consensus. I tend to believe that where governments find themselves that because of economic dependency or because so many are rather diplomatically cowed by the assertiveness of the People's Republic of China, governments are less willing to speak out than parliamentarians can. IPAC creates a space for parliamentarians to speak out and to try to defend the rules-based order, which is under pressure from China. That's why it matters, and that's why China doesn't like it.
Do you have reason to believe beyond this particular attack that IPAC is particularly in the sights of the CCP? Are there other data points that lead you to see this particular targeting?
Yes, this is at least the second breach that we have suffered. Before we went to Taipei recently for our annual summit, somehow the People's Republic of China obtained our delegates list and targeted members in at least 9 countries to try to prevent them from coming. This involved them phoning up in a very undiplomatic way legislators in Colombia, in North Macedonia, in Slovenia, in various countries to try to tempt them to go to China instead of Taiwan, or to tell them that they might face consequences if they did come. Unfortunately, IPAC has been in the sights of the PRC for some years, but it seems to be getting more severe, not less.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but it's also a compliment to your important work. How could APT 31 have accessed IPAC's email list, in particular my personal email, and your delegates list, as you just referred to?
Thank you. I think that's a very important question. The reason that we have high confidence that they obtained our distribution list is that the list of hits that came back from the FBI included exactly the same personal email addresses that we used to contact various MPs. So for most of the other email addresses on that list were just parliamentary email addresses which are public domain. But the very ones that we used to contact people on personal addresses, which, as you know, Mr. Jennings, included yours, sometimes Gmail addresses or Proton mail addresses, they were exactly the ones that the attackers had also used. So I do not know how they obtained that, but I do have one possible theory. Unfortunately, somebody who used to volunteer for us, a man named Andy Lee, was arrested in China under the national security law. He is in prison in Hong Kong, and he awaits sentencing for national security law crimes, some of which are associated with IPAC. We know that they breached his system, and they may have got our distribution list from him. Very disturbingly, when he was apprehended, he was taken to Shenzhen prison in China and reportedly tortured. This is something the UN rapporteur on torture has actually raised formally, so this isn't just idle speculation. So very unfortunately, in fact, very tragically, we believe that that might have been the way they obtained our list.
Thank you, and I think all committee members would join me in deploring the torture and the treatment of Mr. Andy Lai. I know that this is very personal for members of IPAC who have worked with him, and so I think it's important that is on the record. Mr. de Pulford, some of the counter we've heard from the government is that, it's really complicated to inform members of parliament. There's lots of different kinds of cyber attacks, and they've tried to kind of bury this in apparent complexity when to me it's very simple. If a person is targeted, the FBI tells you they're being targeted, you would just pass along that information. There are a number of countries that did inform their members of parliament just to kind of break through the false claims of complexity here. What happened in those countries? What went well in terms of the process of informing members of parliament, and what can we learn from that?
Thank you for the question. In my opinion, unless there is a very good intelligence reason not to inform parliamentarians, I can't see a good reason why elected representatives wouldn't be told that they've been targeted in a progressive cyber attack. They don't have the ability to defend themselves in such circumstances, or to raise their security game. That would be my fundamental answer. To your point about the other countries, well, I know that in Switzerland and Lithuania, parliamentarians were warned. In fact, they were possibly even warned before the FBI had done their foreign dissemination requests, which is the mechanism through which they tell other countries stuff that they might want to tell their own parliamentarians, because obviously the FBI can't contact you directly. That'd be a violation of diplomatic norms. But in those countries, in Switzerland and in Lithuania, they briefed their MPs because they knew they'd been attacked. So clearly they didn't see a big intelligence problem with telling them. They wanted them to be able to protect themselves and to know that they were a target.
Yeah, so I'm almost done. So just two quick final questions. In those cases, do you know who told them? Was it their parliaments? Was it their security agencies? That'd be worth knowing. And then just in terms of the well, why don't you answer that one first, and then I'll ask my last question here for this time.
My understanding is that they were briefed by both. And very often in different countries, parliamentary security and various intelligence services operate in lockstep anyway. So
okay. And then just the last question I wanted to ask is you mentioned the sovereignty concerns
Rappel au
around the
règlement,
FBI.
Monsieur le Président.
Point of order. I think this subject is so important. we have to perhaps slow down a little bit. It might take a little more time, but I've missed quite a few elements there that might be important.
Probably heard that in the translation. There's just been a request if you could just slow down the pace a little bit so that the translators can keep up. I'm going to, my clock shows 10 seconds, but I'm just going to call it 30, okay? And please just do your best to slow down. Thank you.
I understand that the FBI has this protocol around not wanting to inform us directly. They want to go through our national governments and respect sovereignty. But we live in a democracy where Parliament is supreme. If Parliament were to ask an allied intelligence agency like the FBI to inform members of Parliament directly of threats that they identified, do you think that would be a reasonable safety valve so that members of Parliament, including members of the opposition, aren't beholden to decisions of the executive to constrain our ability to access information that's important to our safety?
Honestly, Mr. Jenister, I think that's a bit above my pay grade in the realms of diplomacy. Certainly, the FBI and the information they gave us was exceptionally useful, and we're very grateful to them for it.
Okay, thanks very much, Mr. Jenis. Mr. Duguid, the floor is yours for 6 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank all of our witnesses for painting a stark and concerning picture of the cyber security threats that our nation and other nations face, and that threat is increasing. One of the things that concerned me most was that our private devices were being targeted. We do have protections for our parliamentary systems, our parliamentary emails, and some of the resources that we have access to as parliamentarians. But as I'm a politician, I'm a parliamentarian, and there's lots of interplay. Sometimes the area is gray between the political and the parliamentary, as you know. And I'm wondering how you learn about attacks on private devices and how we can better protect ourselves as parliamentarians. And is there a gold standard out there somewhere? Is there a nation that we could eliminate? Mr. Junot Katsuya mentioned that we may be in the latter half of the pile with respect to G7 countries. So is there a nation on earth with the best training, the best cybersecurity hygiene that we could emulate? And I'll open that up to any one of our speakers.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the question. Yes, there is definitely more effort performed by our Five Eyes allies when it comes to warn, to train, to raise the awareness. In security, the human factor is always the weakest link. And contrary to maybe the academic comfort that Mr. Ward has put into the technology, it's not enough. Just take the example, for example, a very benign example, but just this week came in the newspaper a city councillor in Gatineau who went to Russia with his equipment and without even thinking that he could be compromised or something like this. This is like naive to borderline stupid. In that perspective, this is the human being the weak element. It's not the technology. We have phenomenal technology. CSE does a fantastic job. It's supported also by the private sector like Bell Canada and other groups that cooperate to try to protect us. But at the end of the day, common sense needs to be injected as well. And in that perspective, from an operational point of view, we need to be capable to warn more and to train more. Continuous training, not only one training you get when you get sworn in and when you arrive as a new member of parliament, and then we forget about you for the next 5 years. No, we need to constantly repeat this, and particularly with the staff. It was mentioned during the Hague Commission that 11 candidates and 13 staff members were on the payroll of the Chinese consulate in Toronto. So you can see that not only the parliamentary members will be targeted, but their staff as well.
Mr. Shaw-Lachance, because you weren't able to speak earlier. Mr. Shaw.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much. And I'd just like to say, the fact that Mr. Genus's personal email was compromised is horrible. And it's because of his job as a parliamentarian. So I thought I could offer some concrete advice to this committee that I hope is helpful. The first is allocate a parliamentary budget for personal cybersecurity protection. And I'll tell you how I protect myself, and I bet you that I'm probably better positioned than everyone in this room, and I'm just some guy. I'm not in the public eye, and I'm not being targeted the same way you are. I use an encrypted multi-hop VPN for my data. I use biometric and cryptographically locked password managers, and each of my passwords is over 20 characters long, and it reads like gobbledygook. So if you tried to brute force my passwords, you'd have to really, really want to. I use the most sophisticated malware protection on a commercial market, and I use a hardware multi-factor authentication for my most sensitive accounts. So if you want to hack me, it'll require a state-level actor who really wants to get in. And then, for my most sensitive stuff, you're going to have to get the keys out of my pocket. All of that, we're talking hundreds of dollars, not thousands of dollars. And so let's allocate some budget for that, and let's make sure that members of Parliament can be part of their own defense. Because if they're going after your personal accounts, it's not because of your personality; it's because of your day job.
Anyone else? Maybe Mr. Ward, just in my mind, we should all have a cybersecurity audit and to point out the weak points and how we can shore them up.
Just to give a quick statistic, a few years ago, I participated to a research that was done by TELUS. They interviewed 600 Canadian companies to try to find out within companies where was the weak link. And they found that the greatest numbers of security breach were done by the executive.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Duguid. Mr. Shelley, you can have my phone for an hour at the end of the meeting. Madame Gaudreau, la parole à vous.
Bon, Monsieur le Président.
Well, thank you, Chair. Can I add that back, the 3 minutes? What? Oh, just kidding. Well, first thing I'd like to hear about are what are the consequences? What's going to happen to us in Quebec, in Canada? We travel. What would be your recommendations? We go to Taiwan, we go to abroad. So what are your recommendations? And what are the consequences? Well, there's a lot of models, but they're not infallible. What's missing currently is more cooperation and collaboration between parliamentarians and those who are responsible for security, state security as well. The idea that you're not even allowed to be informed of something that you were under attack, for example, this is ridiculous. C-70 will change that, I hope, and we'll see how that evolves. But prevention. The equipment cannot do it all. There's no magic telephone or device. We have to develop a culture of this. I'm not talking about spyware and all James Bond and all that. We have to develop a certain reflex. If you have a breach, it allows a lot of other people to be breached. TikTok, why is it so problematic? Because if somebody takes a look at the terms and conditions, you're giving access of your phone, to your contact list, to the cameras, to the pictures, to the microphone, and it can be activated remotely. So this becomes an electronic eavesdropping device. So let's assume a young teen going to college or something. Well, perhaps I also have the number of my uncle who works for National Defense or a strategic supplier of sensitive goods. And we have just given access to an offensive Well, if people are listening in on me, nobody, it's not that bad if they have my contacts, but what would be the consequences for the individual and the parliamentarian who is here? That's not a consequence. Well, we lose the confidence of our allies, first of all. We lose our reputation internationally. Canada's not a serious player. Look at what's happening. So there's a whole sector of our population which is vulnerable, ill protected. There are millions of zombie computers. What is a zombie? It's one that has been infected and is used to be part of a distribution. So we are very poorly educated and aware. We don't invest sufficiently. We're at the bottom of the list for the G7, and we just do not do enough to protect our parliamentarians. And as I say, as soon as there's a hole in the dike, anybody can get through. Foreign intervention must be made to stop it. Okay, I have further questions. I heard Mr. Ketsia say that cyber attacks is a weapon of choice. I have young adolescents at home, and are you aware that cyber attack is the weapon of choice? And how did that come about?
Through you, Chair, I'll say that the cyber weapon is a very formidable one, and it is directed down various vectors, as the professionals often refer to it. How did it become so formidable? I think there are really two answers to that. One is a general answer. It's the nature of the digital lives that we all lead, which creates great openings and vulnerabilities, particularly for sophisticated foreign state actors to try and gain access to our data for all kinds of manipulative purposes. The other, of course, and here this is a very significant threat, the other way in which cyber has become so significant is that it has given an entirely new kind of tool for foreign states to conduct espionage operations against adversaries or countries of interest. And the foreign espionage aspect of cyber capabilities is one that I think that we perhaps do not pay enough attention to in the context of all the discussions we've had about foreign interference. Thank you.
I have a little bit of time left, but if I understood you correctly, what you're trying to advise the population is that it's not just another product, and they really have to be careful. Now, I'd really like more time, but that's it for now. Well, Madame Goudreau. Madame Matheson.
Thank you to the witnesses for appearing today. I certainly want to say how serious we absolutely need to take this. You've made this very, very clear. I know that we all do. In past conversations with our own security personnel and people in charge of this, they, I think, and from what I took from it, they were saying we didn't inform at the same rate. Eventually we did, but we didn't inform because this was something that was stopped, that it didn't get through the net. And the idea that there are so many attacks, if we were to let you know about all of them, that's all that we would do. What are your comments, I guess, on that per se, or what can we do to, I don't know, do we have to change that mentality? Do we just say, let us know about all of them? Could you comment on that a little bit?
The area which will be targeted will be the people of strategic importance. Parliamentarians are definitely people of strategic importance. Critical infrastructures are definitely of strategic importance. There is a technical term, very easy that everybody knows, that we call the ping. Every day they try. They try. So they ping. They knock at the door, see if the door is open. They try the handle. That we don't need necessarily to know because, yes, indeed, there is hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of attacks every day. So in that perspective, we cannot sort. But when somebody is particularly targeted repeatedly because of what they do in their work, what they promote, what they challenge, or what they denounce, like transnational oppression and stuff like that, they should be warned. They should receive a better attention. They should be receiving also training to a certain extent. Like I said, to develop a new business culture, a new way of being aware. Because awareness is the only true defense that we have. Technical can do so much only.
Did you want me to come in on this?
Sure.
So, through you, Mr. Chair. I mean, in preparation for this, I went through all the other witnesses' testimony, and if I was to offer advice to remedy what I saw in the previous evidence, I'd offer you 3 pieces of advice. The first is get your information sharing house in order. Like, it was one of those kind of things where everyone didn't really know who was sharing what with whom, when, and why. And there was a recognition that that was a problem. And as my colleague, Mr. Wark, has indicated, the MOU's been updated. So if you haven't seen that, I would encourage you to take a hard look at that and just make sure that it's tight and that we know. Because also treat this like a dress rehearsal. Like this is going to happen again and again and again. And so just make sure you know who's on first with respect to the sharing of information and what happens and what that threshold is. Number 2, as I'd already indicated, some personal money to protect yourselves. And while the evidence indicated that the threat was stopped, we don't know about. And sorry, Mr. Genus, we don't know about his personal account because that wouldn't have fallen within the IT department of Parliament. And then the third is training, but not just cyber training, like general awareness, so that you can be your own best partner in your defense.
In terms of actually, both of you, Mr. Schull and Mr. Wark, you've come before Defense Committee before, where we've had conversations, and so it's good to see you at another committee. But we had important conversations about how social media giants are being weaponized against Canadians as well. Seeing social media bots taking over, of course, algorithms that are written specifically in terms of how they are encouraged to make as much money as possible, publication or advertisements that are surrounding those algorithms, driving Canadians potentially down a specific path, and an ignorance of that or a denial of that by social media giants. What do you think government needs to do in order to manage that in maybe a different way than we have before?
Ms. Matheson, that's a very difficult question. And I guess my first response is that I'm not sure governments have the primary responsibility in this regard. I think it's up to all Canadians to be educated about the nature of these kinds of threats and to exercise good judgment to the extent possible. Regulating social media companies, particularly foreign giants, is a complex task. I think there are things that can be asked of social media platforms in terms of their own self-monitoring of malicious information and making more transparent the nature of their business enterprise so that we all understand what we're being subjected to would be helpful. Generally, the approach, it's not consistent around the world, but generally the approach has been so far to try and work in partnership with social media companies. Perhaps we'll find that that's not going to work entirely satisfactorily, but it's going to be a difficult business because they are giants.
There's a counter discourse that needs to be developed from the government.
Sorry, Mr. Junot-Ketsu, just very, very quickly.
Well, I agree. I totally agree that the social media are going to be weaponized. They are currently weaponized. And with the arrival of artificial intelligence, this is going to go even worse. So there's something we should know.
Okay, merci.
Sorry, can he finish his sentence just because of that
Yeah,
disruption?
he can. Yeah,
Would that be
go
all
ahead.
So
Sorry
we
about that.
definitely need to pay attention. When it comes to cybersecurity and the element of the parliamentary, what is currently happening is that there's a lot of radicalization that are taking place because some foreign countries are using the social media to sort of influence certain groups. And the polarization that are taking place turns into our street, where we have MPs being aggressed by assaulted by people, and that is happening in the cyberspace as well. So that's the reason why we need to pay attention and to develop a stronger discourse, a counter discourse to what's currently happening.
Okay, merci. Thank you very much. Mr. de Pulford, I just wanted to note, I know you've raised your hand a few times. The rules stipulate that, unfortunately, unless recognized by a member, I can't cede the floor to you. So I just wanted to provide that clarification. Perhaps that's okay. Yeah, perhaps in the line of questioning to come, you'll be called upon. But I just wanted to offer that clarification. Mr. Cooper, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. To Mr. de Pulford, you noted that 2 politicians were successfully compromised. For clarification, was this part of the same APT-31 progressive reconnaissance attack?
Thank you for your question, Mr. Cooper. We do not know because we don't have the evidence of that. I put that question directly to the FBI, and this is what they said. We have no data showing whether the APT group took any additional targeting actions after sending the initial tracking link emails. But based on our cumulative knowledge, it would be assumed there would have been follow-on efforts by the cyber actors to target those accounts. So we don't have the evidence of it, but I'll give you the timeline. They were successfully compromised 2 months after the progressive attack had begun, the Pixel reconnaissance attack in January 2021.
You for that, and you had also indicated in your testimony that the position that the Government of Canada, for instance, has taken, which is to say that, well, these 18 parliamentarians weren't informed, but to some degree it's not really that big of a deal because the attack was successfully thwarted. You stated that that position is, if I heard you correctly, at best questionable and at worst misleading. Can you perhaps expand upon that?
Yes, absolutely. And I would like to say very quickly, people from all parties in Canada were attacked in this attack. The attackers didn't care which parties they were from. But I do not believe it is correct to say that the attack was unsuccessful. In fact, we've already heard actually from one of the other witnesses today that because they do not know what happened with Mr. Jennis's personal account, they could not assure that the attack was unsuccessful. It is simply not possible to say that. Not only that, technically speaking, it's very difficult to assure that anyway, for the following reasons. Many parliamentarians were told around the world these were unsuccessful low-level attacks like marketing emails. That in itself is not incorrect. Pixel embedding, pixel tracking is very, very common. However, in the hands of a state-sponsored hacking group like APT-31, they're very different. I would say very briefly, I know I don't have much time, what they can do with that is triangulate where that person is from. They could find a vulnerable router, easily hack that on the basis of the information they can gather from Pixel reconnaissance emails, and much worse. We have a member whose emails were compromised and whose emails were given to a political opponent for compromat. So this is really rather serious, and it ought not to be described as a low-level, unsuccessful attack.
Thank you for that. Mr. Juno Katsuya, the government put in place a ministerial directive in May of 2023. However, the 18 parliamentarians were kept in the dark about this attack all the way through. It was only thanks to IPAC that they became aware of it. I would note that following the issuance of the ministerial directive in May of 2023, in August of 2023, 24 government agencies and departments received a briefing about this attack, including the Prime Minister's Department, the PCO. So, what good is a ministerial directive if there is no follow-through? And I would welcome any comments you have about the ministerial directive that was issued in May of 2023, and perhaps what, if anything, could be improved upon with respect to that directive.
Very little good. very little good. If you do not share information, if you do not share about what's going on, if you sort of don't learn from the experience of others, you're not going to get ahead of your time and ahead of the bad guys. The bad guys will always win. So we need to be capable to have a little bit more transparency. We need to have also have accountability. That's one of the things that is lacking. A lot of people will, including the private sector, will try to sort of hide as much as possible. Back in 2010, there was a successful attack into the Treasury Board of Canada that went through a law firm in Toronto. They went through the private sector to enter the Canadian. To this day, we're not capable to assess if we have been capable to clean the entire Treasury Board system, and the Treasury Board has been shut down for 3 weeks in that period of time. Outside communication. So this is important. This is really important to sort of work in cooperation, in sharing information, in sharing experiences in order to be capable to defend ourselves.
But you would agree it's a failure. The 24 government agencies,
Mr. Cooper,
including
just
the Prime Minister's
very
Department,
quickly,
were
please.
briefed, but these members of Parliament were left in the dark following the issuance of that directive.
Mr. President, I didn't hear what you said.
Mr. Cooper, we are over time. I will give you the opportunity to repeat the question very quickly, please, and a brief response from Mr. Junot-Katsuya.
We are learning. We are learning. Everybody is learning. There's definitely, in my experience, in my 40 years of experience in the intelligence world, what I've seen in the government is constantly attempt to sort of hide as much as possible those quote-unquote failure. But that's not the right way to do it. That's not the right way. We need to be capable to sort of share and to learn from one another so we can get stronger and better at our job.
Thank you very much, sir. Ms. Romanado for 5 minutes.
The witnesses for being here today. So I want to pick up on something that Mr. Junot-Katsuya, you mentioned that in just a previous example of an incident that happened with the Treasury Board in 2010, that it was through a law firm. So, and Mr. Schull, you also mentioned about there's the physical tools that we can use. There's also the training of personal responsibility and being careful on how we do the business that we do in training that's required. But in this case of Apt 31, we heard from the previous witness that it was through their organization that the email distribution list or email addresses were accessed. In the case in 2010, it was through a law firm. So in terms of, there's educating parliamentarians in terms of us making sure that we're careful on what we're doing and we're using every tool in the toolkit, as Mr. Schull said, and I would love to show him my phone as well after, to secure. So there's the behavior and then there's the tools as well. But what would you advise organizations that we're involved with? So for instance, many of us, we give our email addresses out when we're talking with people who want to meet with us, organizations, so on. So they're creating distribution lists as well that we have no control over. We are public officials. We are public, so we share our information so that people can be in touch with us. So how can we make sure if a third party has our these distribution lists, that they're also being mindful of the fact that they are susceptible, especially if they're working with a lot of parliamentarians, to keep our information safe? What would you recommend to them as well?
To control and to be capable to raise the awareness with a third party is a very, very difficult task because you don't necessarily have the control on what they do, how they do it, and who they train and stuff like that. Again, it returns to general public awareness that should sort of be informed. But there's an element as well that should be taken when sometimes you don't have control. As you pointed out, your email address is publicly known, and people might take it and simply use it for their own purpose, and it's only at the end you're going to see that, oh, they use my address. But when you do business with people, you should be able to ask them certain standards, and the Canadian government should be capable to impose those standards as well. Just like public work impose certain standards when you do contract with the government, somehow there's this kind of new business culture that I'm talking about still need to be defined in its details, but somewhere, somehow, there's a general awareness that needs, and education that needs to sort of start to percolate more to the general public.
Okay, and Mr. Schull, I'll give you a few seconds to answer, but I do also want to get back to Mr. de Pulford because he wanted to provide us some additional recommendations, and I don't think he had a chance to do so. Mr. Schull, do you have anything to add to that?
Just say in answer to your question, if I understood it correctly through you, Mr. Chair, was about email addresses, and I'm like, you don't need to hack a database to get your email address. I get it off the internet. So there's really three questions that are germane to this committee's work. Number one is, when does CSE notify your IT department, and what do they do as a consequence of that notification? Number two, when do notifications go to members themselves, and under what circumstances, and who is indeed the lead? Is it CSIS? Is it CSE? Is it your IT department? And that's what landed us in this discussion today. And number three, what do you do as an individual member of parliament when you leave here and pick up your personal device? Because your day job, while it might stop for the day, threat actors are still looking at you as a person.
Thank you. And Mr. de Pulford, you wanted to also add some additional recommendations. I think you only had two of them for us, but if you'd like to add to that.
And in about 45 seconds, sir. We're running over time. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. There need to be more resources for parliamentary security. This is a David versus a Goliath fight, unfortunately, and that's the case not just in Canada, but really across the world. There needs to be threat modelling for every MP and staff. Very important that staff are also exposed to, because of who they work for, and very often an easy way in to a member of parliament. Staff need to be included in training processes. In some places, mystery shopper phishing has been done by parliamentary security in order to work out whether or not parliamentarians are up to standard. That could also be recommended. But finally, really, those responsible should be sanctioned. In the United Kingdom and the United States, APT 31, who confirmed to have imposed this attack, were sanctioned. Well, 18 Canadians were sanctioned, were attacked as well. So surely a similar remedy ought to be appropriate for them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Madame Gaudreau, 2 minutes 30 secondes.
C'est difficile, Monsieur le Président. Ben, c'est pas compliqué.
Well, I've found a solution. It's not too hard. A good solution. I would invite you to answer my questions if you can. What are the consequences? We didn't talk about, national economy here or anything like that. But are there models that we can get, are used elsewhere in the world, other countries? And consequences. But I had some time to review this, and I'd like to know, Mr. Chung, I have 16 characters in my password. Is that sufficient? Well, you were telling us yours was almost unbreakable. But anyway, when the CSE came to meet us, or will come to meet us, you seem to be very well informed on this file. I'm really a novice in all this. On the 15th of December, 21, in France, there was something very similar to APT 31. I have the summary here, and I can find ways. And this is a public document, which tells us we have a lot of work to do. So why are we hiding? Why are we not sharing this information? Well, that's a $65 million question. Why not hide when we have a problem? But how about we share when we have a success? But this culture of silence is working against us. Really, Is this part of a conventional tradition or usage that we've inherited from a Westminster bloc or something? No. We have to get over that. We have to change. We have to change. Thank you, Madame Gaudreau.
For 2.5 minutes, the floor is yours.
Love it when I get the end bit. I just wanted to actually go over, Mr. Giannocatia. You had said, I think, in your opening remarks, unless I missed it, and so I'd love clarification, the cyber offensive powers, and then you listed several countries. Can you just repeat that for us again here?
Yeah, China, Russia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Israel. We could go on. CSIS in 2015 testified, the director, Mr. Michel, I forgot. Anyway, Coulomb testified in front of a Senate committee and referred to that there were 115 countries that were practicing cyber offenses, cyber attack. 115 countries back in 2015. That was according to the estimation of CSIS. So it's more than half of the country, and it's very easy to be very offensive. Take a nerd that is good with computer, give him 2 Red Bull and a computer, and he's good. And that's it. That's all. He's gone, and he's capable to do a lot of damages. What we need to understand, and the question of Madame Gaudreau is so important, is the consequences, because we don't talk enough about the consequences. Now, the consequences only to raise awareness and the level of urgency to start working on it. We're not being able necessarily to curb the consequences right away, but we need to be capable to raise awareness, to pay much more attention to what's going on, and to realize that it's going to be worse before it gets better.
So, I mean, in the list, 115. Obviously, there's the countries that we're not on good terms with. There's countries that we are. Are we doing enough? Is Canada doing enough with the countries that we're supposed to be allies with? On those fronts to make a dent?
Has disappeared with the end of the Cold War. We've moved from a military confrontation to an economic confrontation when the Soviet bloc disappeared. And now it's everybody for themselves. So now what we're talking about is the national security goes through solid economic viability for your countries. So everybody competes for the same market share, for the same contracts, for the same sort of competition economically. And that economic war has transferred itself into the cyber.
Thank you very much, Ms. Matheson. Colleagues, that brings us to the end of the meeting. Thank you very much, witnesses, for being with us. Colleagues, a friendly reminder that we are extended in our next 2 meetings and that we're beginning at 10:30 to 1:30. Okay, so just that friendly reminder, it's 10:30 to 1:30 in the following 2. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.